Hello everyone and welcome to this Total Education lecture. We'd like to remind you that these lectures are brought to you for free, so if you'd like to help us out, give us a like down below. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the space below. And of course, don't forget to visit our website, totaleducationcentre.com.au. At the website you'll find teacher resources if you're a teacher, and of course there are student notes that go along with these lectures that will help and assist you in any examination situation. So don't forget, visit the website totaleducationcentre.com.au.
Hello, my name is Bruce Pattinson and I'm here today to talk to you about Brave New World. We're just basically going to have a quick look at the context of Brave New World, some of the ideas behind Brave New World, and just give you a general introduction to the text. We start out by looking at Brave New World as a title, and I think we need to think about that because it's very, very relevant throughout the text. The Brave New World, of course, comes from The Tempest, where The Tempest is a Shakespearean island paradise, basically. However, in this society, the complete opposite occurs. The islands are symbols of failure. The emphasis throughout this text is on identification with the community and a desire for solitude or individuality as an ill. And that's very different to Shakespeare's idea in The Tempest. As on page 90 of this text it says, it would upset the whole social order if men started doing things on their own. But of course, that sense of free will and individuality is very important in Shakespeare's The Tempest, and that's where the clash comes through, and that's where John fits in, as you'll find in your reading of the text. But of course, the references to Shakespeare go way beyond that sense of context of Huxley's world. John has, through his contact with the literature, extended his responses into what he considers a range of people and how they've affected the world that he lives in. Thus we have Miranda's comment when she encounters men for the first time in The Tempest, and Othello's disgust with humanity clouds his judgment. There's lots of things there that the Shakespearean tendencies in this book are very, very strong. So that's probably the essence of the title and where that's coming from, and you'll learn more about that as we go through the text and you watch these lectures. There's also great detail on that in the study notes that you can find and the teacher notes on our website. But let's now have a very specific look at the context. Brave New World, its socio-historical context is basically 1932. So what do we get from 1932? The sense of he's lived through that widespread suffering of the Great War, the 1914-18 war. Also the sense of the Great Depression from 1929 to 1933 and the great numbers of people and countries that were affected. And so we see this sort of spread out through the Brave New World. The link to the concept there is the focus on peace at any cost, i.e. that keyword stability. And I think that keyword stability is very important when you consider 1984. And when we look at the politics of 1984, I think stability, as Marx talks about later on, is key and integral to that. All right, what else do we have in here in that socio-economic context of 1932? The quest for economic stability is extremely important. We have the growing dominance of the United States of America, a sense of mass production. We have the idea of production lines seen as the ultimate in efficiency, the Henry Ford model, and we see that, of course, in the text. The concept of single skilling in factories, rather than men being multi-skilled. They do one particular job, they do it all day, and theoretically they do it very well. And we also see through that 20s, in America especially, the idea of conspicuous spending and hedonism. So how does all that link into Brave New World? Of course, we see the factory scenes in Brave New World. We see the idea of not mending things, not fixing things, just throwing them away and buying new ones. We see it in the sports that require many implements and those sorts of issues and ideas. Consumerism, mass consumerism, don't worry about it, spend it, buy it, throw it away, the sense of waste. And that comes out of that economic sense in that pre-1932 era. What else do we see? The developments in science and technology are also extremely important. We've been through that war, the weapons of mass destruction, the tanks, the aeroplanes and those sorts of things. We also see zippers and man-made textiles becoming more and more important, and that's alluded to in the novel. The collision between art and science, and we see that in the novel. And how does this come out technological focus, and the power of science is extremely evident in the novel. And Huxley talks about that very clearly as we go through, and we'll discuss that in great detail later, because science is what backs the political situation in the Brave New World. What else do we get in 1932? That sense of rising totalitarianism that we've talked about before in other lectures. Mussolini in Hitler in Germany, the communist state in Russia, Lenin, Marx, Stalin, that sort of thing, and the state before the individual. And that's where that idea state first comes from, state interference and the loss of individuality. That's what comes through in all those texts. What else? Sexual promiscuity, very evident in the novel. Comes out of sort of the Roaring Twenties in America and the rise of women, the sense of partying and what many saw as the moral decline of society, and the rise of women and making them more self-aware and getting, sort of out of the traditional roles because of that war and the loss of men and in work and in play as well. Brave New World is a world of community, identity, and stability. And I think those three things are very important, and that's the catchphrase, isn't it, for that novel. And all that stems from the context, and we can see that in that sense of community. There is no individual freedom or liberty in this world. There's certainly no privacy. We have an abolition of relationships. We have an abolition of family. We have community sports. There are no individual as such sports anymore. And we see the corporate good of the state before individual rights. And I think that's extremely relevant when you look at the political situation and how the society comes and stems from that sense of community. So what is identity in this society? Identity isn't how we see identity. Identity is not that personal individuality. It's more the structure of that society and how you're structured. Your identity is given to you pre-birth. So we have the alphas, the betas, the gammas, the deltas, and the epsilons. In other words, we have that social predestination. You are what you are born. There's no living for the present and certainly no history. And the final one we probably should talk about is stability. And stability is very important. The political situation is extremely stable and they intend to keep it that way. I alluded to this when I talked about Shakespeare earlier in the text, when we looked at the idea of the Tempest and the islands. Well, we know what the islands are for in Brave New World. They're to send people to that show signs of individuality and free will. Of course, John does also, and he doesn't end up on an island, but he's a very special case, and we'll talk about him in another lecture. Let's think then about stability. How do they do it? It's conditioning. It's hypnopedia, in other words, the sleep teaching. It's economically based in those 5 levels of people. It's the lack of emotion people have. It's the constant happiness, the use of feelies, the constant attractiveness, the figures of worship, as in Henry Ford or Ford, sexual promiscuity, the soma, and the orgy-porgies. And that's what all those things combine to make society very stable. And we see very few instances of instability in that society, except maybe perhaps when there's nearly the soma right, because John tries to take that away from them. It's also, there are lots of other things in that world, of course, we can talk about. It's a world of science, the worship of science, and God is replaced, and that comes directly, of course, out of context. We see the contrast, the very great contrast between the civilization and the reservation, the uncivilized world, where we see the jealousy and the bickering and the social cruelty, all those things have been eliminated in the Brave New World. We see lots of scientific advances, mass production, and propaganda, and they're things that we'll need to discuss later. So basically, that's a brief overview of the context of Brave New World. And Huxley, I think, goes on to talk about, it's a dystopian novel, of course, but I think he goes on to talk about the future of the world and the way that he saw what was going to happen. And you need to think about that in terms of course, the way that the world is shaped now, but of course, the political situation and the resulting loss of freedom and individuality. And that's the thought I'll leave you with at the end of this lecture. Thank you for watching another Total Education Centre lecture. If you enjoyed the lecture, you might like to give us a like or leave a comment. If you have any suggestions for other lectures or ideas you'd like us to talk about, please don't hesitate to contact us. We're always available. Thank you.